Of course, when we talk about the digital world, you can think of both opportunities and the risks presented by this rapid change. For example, new technologies. You are facing every day different types of technologies which bring you to the benefit in terms of the innovations and also entrepreneurial, some evolutions in areas such as biotechnology or other research areas, more potential for connections. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the possible risks, such as digital divide created by digital device because of the gap between those who can have and those who cannot have, the power of information as a risk, or around students and young people, there are more and more cases of cyber security, cyber bullying, or privacy issues coming out. So these are the things that we might need to consider. But also, we need to position the context of digitalization in a bigger socio-economic context, like changing family structures in different countries, moving from more traditional family relationship and structures to the modern or dramatically changing relationship within the family, within the community, or the issue of environmental and climate change, and etc. So we need to think about what kind of education and learning we expect, keeping in mind this change. When we talk about the digital world, very often we start by looking at some narrow areas directly related to the digitalizations. For example, education policymakers, practitioners immediately jump onto the questions. So what to do with our students so that they can benefit maximum from the rich technological environment, how we can enhance and nurture their ICT-related skills, or how we can incorporate the kind of skills like digital skills, information, data skills into the learning. But as I mentioned, if you want to see the broader consequence of the digitalization in the society and the economy, this is just one small part that we need to consider. If we want to help our students to be ready to encounter, for example, the shift from more labor-intensive work environment to the coexistence between the human beings and robotics, or changing environment and climate change and the impact that could make on the potential and the risks on technologies, we need to think about much broader set of competencies that we expect students to develop, including, for example, as Tim Oates has mentioned, some cognitive skills as a foundations to build the learning of students, but also how students can critically think about the context of the digital world and critically and creatively use the technologies which could be a contribution, but which could not be a contribution to the teaching and learning, depending on how they use. But also for human beings to be human being and continuously create our own values and not being taken over by technologies or robots, but we play our role, important role to continuously build our societies. We need to think about the education systems which could nurture students, for example, self-efficacy, or the capacity to take initiatives, capacity to understand different perspectives among students with different backgrounds. So we need to really think about the competencies that we expect students to develop in a holistic way. So to feed into our reflection, I will present some of the analysis that the OECD has done related to rather the narrow area related to digital skills. So I'm just, specify that within the limited time, I'm not getting into the broader set of skills, but some evidence to highlight the importance of the introduction of technologies or the environment of the digitalization on teaching and learning of students today and tomorrow. We talk a lot about digital skills, but PISA, as we have heard in the morning, assess some of the important and emerging skills of students in addition to math, science, and reading. And now PISA study used the computer assessment so that we can also understand to what extent students are prepared and able to navigate in the reading environment using technologies. Then it shows that for some countries, just having reading skills is not translated into the digital reading skills. But for some other countries, on the left side, for example, Singapore, Korea, or Italy, Canada, their students are showing higher than expected performance in digital reading compared to the level of digital reading that could be expected based on their normal reading skills. So this is a question to policymakers and education leaders. What makes the difference if in some countries students are particularly good at reading in digital context, and what makes the difference in those countries who are doing less than predicted in terms of the digital reading? We can think of some of the background factors, like the students' access to internet. This is access to internet at home, and we have to also look into the similar data, internet access in school. But as you can see, in all countries, I think there's no exception, increasing share of students are having internet in school and at home. But that move and the shift varies across countries. Kazakhstan is one of the countries which has shown a dramatic change in terms of the access of students. So these students are having more opportunities to use internet and be connected. And accordingly, the time spent online outside of school is in increase in all countries, but with different degrees. Some countries like Chile moved almost twice up in terms of the time that students spend, whereas some countries like Korea, Japan, they spend relatively less time compared to other countries online at home, and the speed of the increase is slower. But this is interesting findings because actually these countries, Japan, Korea, but some other countries, are doing well in digital reading, whereas they are spending less time online. So that gives us some questions. So what are the factors helping students to really develop the skills to digital reading context, but maybe other factors such as basic foundational understanding and skills might matter beside the opportunities that students have in terms of the access to the internet or online learning. One alarming fact is that in all countries, but with different degrees, there's a gap between students from advantaged background and disadvantaged background in terms of the opportunity to benefit from the technologies. So this is the gap in terms of the access to internet at home, and some countries, including Kazakhstan, this gap is quite huge. this is something that parents, education stakeholders, and other leaders need to think how we can help all students to benefit from the positive side of the technologies without creating or further increasing this divide between those who have and those who don't have. Another interesting fact is that use of ICT at school is really different depending on the education systems, how their curriculum and teaching practices are designed. But another surprising fact is that many of the Eastern Asian countries, like Korea or Japan, which is my country of origin, are very much low in terms of the use of ICT in different ways at school, compared to some other countries like Denmark and Norway. But at the same time, this doesn't necessarily reflect in terms of the results or the level of digital skills of students. So this again gives us an important question that maybe it is not the matter of the accessibility or the time spent or the resources, but it is the question of how the opportunity of the technology is seized and designed, integrated into the teaching to strengthen and amplify the teaching and not just to replace what teachers can do. So with the very limited time, I unfortunately have to skip some of the slides, but I show that some countries are doing very explicit work to think about what are the competencies, knowledge, skills, but also attitudes to thrive in the digital world and design these dimensions into curriculum. I just highlighted two examples which might be of interest. For example, European Commission is identifying information literacy as part of the curriculum goal and developing and sharing among countries the learning resources across subjects. Australia is an interesting case because that's one of the rare countries where the investment and access to the technology of students seems to be translated into a better learning. And one of the contexts that we might need to consider is that Australian national curriculum and assessment program explicitly embed some of the ICT-related competencies in it. But also, as some of the speakers have mentioned, schools could impact on students' behaviors and learning, but out of the school context matters a lot. So you might need to look into what's happening in each country and in different contexts. This is just one example how students are doing the leisure activities out of school using computers, like chatting, doing mail information, or playing games with computers. And you see interesting patterns across countries. It looks a bit similar, but actually it's different country by country. Like Denmark, students in general are using computers more to do the chat, mail info, or news to exploit the information available for them, and some degree of computer-based games. But maybe other, side Sweden in a similar context, but their students are probably using more time for the computer games. But across all these countries, what is striking is that students from advantaged background, the gray line, and disadvantaged background, blue dot, are having different patterns in terms of the use of computers outside of school. And as you can see, students from a more advantaged background are benefiting and having access more on the computer-based activities, which might be also conducive to the learning and acquisition of the knowledge and skills. So I would like to listen to other speakers. So I just conclude my presentation with these maybe questions, if we have time, that I want to ask to you, and I also would like to hear your views. For you, what are the most important competencies to help students thrive in the digital world that I described? And what knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values should education systems in Kazakhstan incorporate in the learning, taking into account your own context? So for participants from Kazakhstan. So this is maybe the point where I stop, and I hope that we have enough time later to have some exchange of ideas. Thank you very much.